Come on down. The price is right. And I'm going to charge Dr. Jackson to do the introductions for this panel. Thank you.
Good morning again. So the topic in the next 90 minutes or so, maybe a little bit less, is cultural planning and growing a creative community. And we've got 4 really accomplished and passionate folks to hear from. In preparation for this, we want this to be very conversational and not have talking heads and presentations. So it'll have some organic flow, we hope. And in preparation for this, I asked the panelists to just think about their work, the places where they're working, the kinds of both impediments and facilitating factors that they're encountering as they do their work. And this is as much a conversation with me and them as it is among themselves. And in the last several minutes, we'll open it up. So it's a conversation with you as well. Let me jump in. And I've asked each to just take a minute or two to say more about themselves, the place where they work, and what they're up to. And that will be the basis for the conversation to come. And we have Rhonda Lane Coleman, who is director of 29 Palms Art Gallery and wears other hats as well, she may refer to in her comments. Kathleen Gallegos is a commissioner with the California Arts Council and founder and director of Avenue 50 Studio in Highland Park in the Los Angeles area. Catherine Tessier is the director of Jevitt Management in Pomona. John Wharton is director of the Ontario Museum of History and Art and is also a member of the Ontario Cultural Planning Group. So if each of you, in whatever order you like, should I call on? If you could just take a couple of minutes and situate us where you are, what you're thinking about.
If only you saw what happened backstage. They pushed me to the front. I was thinking last night that this month marks the 27th year I've been working in the arts, which I believe I've done my math correctly, which scares me a little bit. I have had 3 art lives. The first third was as a academic museum curator and art historian. And my second life, I sort of 1 foot inside the museum world, 1 foot out. It wasn't quite the right fit for me, and I left, and some said it was a professional suicide to leave the museum world. But it was important to me to want to explore new arts models that were sustainable and explore new ways of community development. And then about 8 years ago, my husband's job brought us to 29 Palms. Has anyone been to 29 Palms? Wow, cool. So I thought I was taking a sabbatical from the art world. I had gone from being in Seattle at the Contemporary Art Museum working about 80 hours a week, and then working in a nonprofit, functioning as a dual head nonprofit and a design firm, and I wound up in this creative hotbed. You look out onto this landscape. So for those of you who've been to 29 Palms, this is no surprise. We are about 2 hours east of here, north and east of Palm Springs. And the area that I'll be speaking about really covers about a 60-mile corridor that stretches along the northern border of Joshua Tree National Park. So Morongo, Yucca, Joshua Tree, 29 Palms, Wonder Valley, and anything in between. And when you look out onto the landscape, it seems that there's nothing there, but in between all the cracks and fissures, it's probably one of the strongest concentrations of creatives that I've ever come across, both on the West Coast and the East Coast. So architects, filmmakers, musicians, it's pretty phenomenal. And so currently I'm functioning as a director for the 29 Palms Art Gallery, which is one of the oldest longstanding nonprofit arts organizations in the region. It is all volunteer. Yes, I'm a volunteer. And was sort of stuck in the 19th century, and we're trying to bring it up to the 21st century. But I also wear a number of other hats, functioning as an advisor to the Joshua Tree National Park Council for the Arts. And I really sort of made it my work in being up there. There's lots of amazing small arts organizations, but I like working with them and assessing their strengths and weaknesses and taking them through strategic planning development processes, and really interested in getting us to work together. And I'm going to leave it at that because we're supposed to keep it brief. But there are lots of amazing, it is unbelievable. You talked a little bit about the cultural and arts integration, and sort of, I took it as professional and amateur arts, and we have a lot of that up there, and there's a place for all of it. So trying to take all that in, and I'll leave it there.
The Avenue 50 studio has been around for 15 years. When I first arrived at Avenue 50 in Highland Park, Highland Park is known as an arts community. It was the first arts community in Los Angeles. And so there were a lot of artists there, but there was no cultural spaces for artists. There were no galleries. Everyone went outside of the community. When we opened our doors, we were the only art gallery in Highland Park. The Highland Park community is mainly made up of the Latino community. We opened up primarily as a Latino arts gallery to help our artists to show and exhibit their work, because they were not getting into mainstream galleries. Because it's a really wonderful small little town feel in Highland Park, and because the Gold Line opened up right through Highland Park, and it's 10 minutes from downtown, we're going through a lot of some serious gentrification right now. We have two major streets cutting through Highland Park. One is Figueroa, which has just been dubbed what do they call them, famous streets, or one of the important streets, great streets of Los Angeles. And we have York Boulevard, which one of our council people has put a lot of time and energy into to turn it around into an arts district. While we welcome change and want our neighborhood known as an arts community, it's having a negative effect on many of our local residents. And so the nature of the community is changing. The nature of the types of people coming into the Avenue 50 is also changing. So we're faced with the challenge of how do we stay alive and speak to our community? This is where I live and work. When our community is kind of disappearing.
Hi, I'm John Warden, the director of the Ontario Museum of History and Art, and I've been there for 2 years, and I feel incredibly fortunate. Dr. Jackson was talking about seizing the moment and what's happening around us, and for whatever reasons, Ontario, which is well known as a business-friendly community, has really started to focus on arts and culture. And arts and culture, like we have started talking about today, as a way to define the community. And our museum is at the edge of historic Ontario. So we've got historic Euclid Avenue. We've got some partners that we really enjoy working with, Chaffey Community Museum of Art, Ontario Heritage. We're near the library. We're near a couple new parks that we've been fortunate to be able to add public art to it. And we have, with the city's help, and our museum is a department of the city. We have a nonprofit support group, but that's a little bit of importance. So we convened a group of like-minded people who love arts and culture, and informally our name is the Arts and Culture Strategic Planning Group. We've been meeting for about a year, and it's our neighbors, CCMA and Ontario Heritage, different departments of the city as well. So the city planning department is very involved. We're involved, of course, as the museum. And we've been doing a little bit of things that we've started to talk about: cultural mapping, figuring out what our assets are, combining our efforts, realizing that we're close together, but we're very fragmented. We don't have a strong history of working together. So we've been collaborating on things, and we've created a joint website so that people looking for arts and culture can go to one place and see it. We've started doing public art. So we're just at the very beginning part of learning how to work together, how to work with artists and help to define a sense of community. But we're at the front end of things.
My name is Kathy Tessier, and I'm from the Downtown Pomona Arts Colony. We're at a different phase of our development as well. Our family was involved in the city for many years, and we were primarily residential landlords. And my husband's office was downtown, and we got continually frustrated with the 90% vacancy rate, occupied by nothing other than people sleeping in doorways and those kinds of things. And some of the difficulties that downtown was facing. My husband made the announcement that we were moving our law office to downtown Central Mall. And that started a whole new phase of our relationship with the city of Pomona. And we bought some buildings that were vacant, and we continued to look around us and be frustrated. And about the only asset that we had downtown at the time were a lot of great artists living in second-story buildings illegally and in rear alleys, and a fledgling Western U medical school. So we approached the city about what we would like to do in terms of making mixed-use occupancy. And at the time, this was a really bad term. Fire departments didn't like it, police departments didn't like it. Insurance companies hated it. You couldn't get loans on the buildings. It was not a really good time. So we thought, well, if nobody else is going to do it, we wrote the ordinance and got it passed. We fought all the battles and began to renovate the buildings. And now we have a 95% occupancy rate. The core of the development really focused on the arts because that was the asset that we had in place already, and we were fortunate to have it. The next step was to figure out how do we continue to keep that development on track. We started a charter school, a School of Arts and Enterprise. Now there's 3 buildings downtown, and as a core contributor, we still have nonprofit galleries, and we still have a lot of artists living in the area. The problem with our kind of approach is that it really requires people that are willing to invest time and money into it, private party. And the problem all along has been we've never really had city support. So we're continuing to struggle with that. And as a result, we lose galleries because they simply can't afford to rent, and or as we provide free rent for much of our for the galleries in our buildings, but other owners won't do that. So that's our next step, is to, in our development phase, is to figure out how do we get the city involved, how do we get governments involved in general in supporting the galleries, which actually our galleries, all of them, are very community oriented and have a huge number of community classes and activities. And they allow their spaces to be used by other groups for free, and yet they're not supported.
So a question for all of you, and thank you for helping us envision where you are and what you're work is right now. But because you're all working towards something else, right, that is beyond where you are now, if you were to fast forward 10 years from now and you had your druthers, what would your community look like? So Kathy, you started already, I think, down that path saying you want government support, you want city support, and so you put us on that path already, but and anyone can begin. 10 years from now, if you're successful, what does your community look like?
I understand that rural communities are constantly changing. And, you know, to say that we can't have development, we can't improve our communities is kind of backward thinking. And I've heard people say they want it exactly the way it is. It has to be humane development. It has to be well thought out, where everybody is at the table. And what I would like to see in my community, I would like to see, I would like our community to be affordable for all people. That is, you know, right now we've got these huge developers coming in, buying up these wonderful apartments and then fixing them up and then turning around and doubling and tripling the price to get in. I think it's wonderful that they're taking over these buildings and doing that. I want to see my community beautified. I want a lot of art in my community. I also love my neighbors. Many of them are Section 8. We have gang members coming into my gallery, loving the art. I want to help them through the arts. I don't want to push them out to another community. So I would like to see my community be very balanced, just graced with a lot of art.
I'll take the next one. I'd like to be able to see my vision would be that the city itself and or supporting governmental agencies or groups see that the community arts centers, art galleries, performance galleries, are an asset of the community, that they do not have to pay to operate the programs, but they can support the venue and the physical places for these places to generate. Because I think there will always be extremely successful nonprofit groups that can do things very, very well. We have one in our community dog gallery that has an extraordinary number of community programmings, but the community programs they're supporting, they themselves don't have money to pay for the facilities. So I think that if the government could just realize that the prospect for utilizing these centers, and in this case the whole downtown, as a resource and not a drain, that would be the goal.
I think we were talking a little bit before we came on stage, and it's really interesting that we're all at different stages. But I guess being at an earlier stage, from my perspective as arts administrator, I'd really like to see more stakeholders, and I'd like to see the belief and confidence that artists themselves can be the drivers for a lot of the creative activities that we're talking about. And we can create the overlays and the mechanisms, if we're lucky, to be supportive of that. But we also have to remember that artists are great and people in the community are great. Other organizations, other entities, they're really good about creative problem solving if we're able to give them half a chance. So I see my role as growing, and 10 years down the road, I want people to feel like they're invested and they've had a chance to invest. In particular, the creative torchbearers. I'd like to see them at the front of the line.
My brain is full. What's really special about where we live, and when I say where we live, sometimes it's referred to as the Morongo Basin, sometimes high desert, other times Joshua Tree Gateway communities. It is partly the landscape, I believe, that's drawn us there. There is affordability in living, there is a sense of freedom of restriction, and the opportunity to be what many of us have discussed as pioneers living on kind of a new frontier. It sounds cheesy, but it's true. So I'm quite energized by the numbers and levels of individual artists and groups who are the drivers within our community. What I would like to see, because we have all of these individual artists, we have Joshua Tree Music Festival, we just had the Joshua Tree International Film Festival, Boxo House, JTAG, 29 Palms Art Gallery, and the list goes on. Phenomenal, but we aren't necessarily working together collectively, and we have something called the Morongo Basin Cultural Arts Council, which started a number of years ago. You'll have to correct me about how many years, I don't know, 12, 13, I don't know, over a decade. And I think perhaps the original, it started out as a Highway 62 art tours, open studio tours for artists, and I think it was intended to be something bigger. What I would like to see 10 years from now is a council of sorts where all of these individuals and organizations can come together collectively to discuss what they're doing. Look, I love that we function up there as, instead of a big yellow school bus, little red sports cars, perhaps not the right terminology, but all of us have the ability to go off and do our own things. And the experimentation in the process and the programming and the curatorial often reflects what's happening in contemporary art. But we're all off doing things willy-nilly when we could be learning from each other more and pulling our resources and being much more efficient. So I'd really love to see that. And an increased, in that sense, I want to slap myself for saying this, but I'm going to say it anyways. I'd like to see an increased level of professionalism. So while I love the going out there and doing it, one of the most important things about our community is we are a community of doers. When I was at the museum, we would spend 2 to 3 years in advance planning, and that's fabulous on a number of accounts, needing to raise money, pull together groups of people. It's miraculous. Sometimes things happen in a week's time or a month's time or a couple months' time. I don't want to get rid of that. That is exciting. Sometimes I'm like, what? Someone will say, there's this thing going on Saturday. Didn't you hear about it? No. But everybody shows up. That's what's wonderful about our community. But I like a little bit of more advanced collaboration so that we can communicate with each other and also, quite frankly, to the outside world. Because I think what we have up there is, and I sound cheesy, beyond special and magical, but I don't know that the rest of the world knows that we're there. We have 1.9 million visitors to Joshua Tree National Park. That brings in approximately, I don't know, correct me, $97 million. There is the park, and there are these amazing protected lands, which is in part through work by organizations like Mojave Desert Land Trust, and preserving these places, which is what attracts us in the first place. But it would be great if we can get together, create some professionalism, and stop spinning our wheels so much. I'd also like to say, I don't know how to say this, sometimes we need not to be so nice. I'm really nice, I want to be really inclusive, and I want to share with people. And I'm a total mothering, caretaker kind of person. I want everyone to be happy. But there is an importance in being selective. And so when you talked about the integration of sort of amateur, this is my interpretation, amateur and professionalism, I want that. But I want to be able to talk about that openly. I'll leave that there. And on the reverse side, we need to stop being so snobbish. You know, people are attracted to that area. There it goes. So people are attracted, now I'll be talking for an hour. People are attracted to that area because they can go and do and be in ways that they don't feel like they can. Thank you. See, I didn't need it. In an urban city. And I think too, getting rid of the parochialism or being narrow-minded, I know that it's a comedy routine. I know that there is fear in change, and so when I went into the 29 Palms Art Gallery, I did it because it's my town, and I live there, and I want to make a difference. That sounds cheesy too. I want to make a difference. But there was a lot of fear in a 60-year-old organization that, quite frankly, it's miraculous that it's been stable without crisis, financially stable, very little back chatter. But it was kind of existing on a plane. And so you get someone that comes in there and wants to really be honest about what the community is now. What the community is now is not what the community was 25 years ago. And so we need to let go of fear too. So
there are a couple of things that are common, and not because the landscapes are common, but there's a concern with how do you confront change, right? Or how do you either embrace it or manage it or resist it or whatever you choose to do to respond. But how do you deal with change seems to be an issue. Another thing that I'm hearing is how do you bolster the organizing capacity of artists in particular, but the arts sector more generally? And how do you create stakeholders, more stakeholders, deeper stakeholders? So if those are themes that seem more or less consistent for different reasons, pick one. What resonates with you as you think about either change or mechanism to organize or...
I'll go ahead and jump in. I think part of it has to do with what kind of opportunities or situations can we create. So in a certain way, and I'm approaching it as an administrator, but in a certain way, I want to be a matchmaker. I want to create a situation where something happens. And truth be told, it's not always pleasant because sometimes we don't know how to work together yet, or we don't know what we're doing yet, or we have to have faith that it will happen. But I do think it's incumbent on us, if we have faith in what we're doing, let's create the situation. Sometimes that may be leadership role where we have to proselytize a little bit and convince people to get off the dime a little bit. But we're so fortunate. We have the opening remarks by our two wonderful county supervisors. Do you know how lucky we are to have two supervisors who are that into understanding and believing and supporting and advocating openly for arts and cultural development, and understanding what that has to do with their positions and creating a sense of place. So we all need to be proselytizers and advocates, and we need to take some chances and create those situations where people are willing to come together and take a risk. That's not easy for anybody.
I'd like to go with the change that you mentioned, because we're seeing it in your island, and we've certainly seen it in Pomona in terms of the use of the buildings and how they change. We are fortunate to be able to retain our work-live units for a lot of our artists, and so they remain an integral part of the community. The galleries struggle. The entertainment venues are coming in, or the Fox Theater at Glass House. We have the several bars and I don't know, that's a bad term to use. Nighttime entertainment, whatever you want to call it. Not strip bars, by the way. These, in a way, are starting to clash because the artists, of course, have a vested historical growth that they fostered, and all of a sudden these newcomers are coming in. So, and also the problem with the change is that the building ownerships change. We talked about that a little bit. Because we have owners of a lot of the buildings downtown, so we know what direction we're going. But a lot of owners that are coming in don't want to take that direction. They don't want to be involved with the arts. They don't want to give away free space. They don't want to build work-live units on their second floors. They'd rather leave them vacant. So, you know, how do we deal with this? And I guess one of the ways is to look into your city government and say, look, we need a little bit more control. Of course, that's a little dirty word sometimes. You don't want that. But on the other hand, we have to, it's like we created, for instance, our public art ordinance. So all new, wherever in the city, have to have a certain percentage of their project has to be devoted to art money. And if they don't want to, then you have to pay a fee into the city coffers. When we just found out that they've actually been setting that aside, and so now we're starting to get in applications for public art. So that's one way that you can begin to integrate the community. But Pomona is basically a low-income community with not a lot of disposable income. So I think it's going to change in terms of the change that Highland's undergoing. I think it's going to be a long time coming. There's a lot of places to be infilled yet. There are a lot of buildings that may be torn down, I think, over a period of time because they're not structurally sound. So that's going to create change, but I think that's going to be a while. And I feel it's our responsibility now that the arts community is involved in this, and we have a Downtown Owners Association, PBID, which is great. And these organizations and persons need to be really, really involved in what happens next, or we're going to lose it. So we really have to find ways to get involved.
I think it's really important for us to listen to our community. And I think that's part of how you grow community. What we try to do at the Avenue 50, and what we say is that our doors are always open. We want and we encourage our community to come out and talk with us. I don't have all the ideas for exhibitions or programming. I have, I think, probably less than half the ideas there, maybe a quarter of the ideas. All the ideas for programming, majority of the ideas for programming has come from the community in discussions with them. They tell us, this would be great if you could do this here, or, what about an exhibition about this or that? So we engage the community. That they take ownership in the Avenue 50 and in the programming there, so they feel that they're part of it, and that's how we've grown the Avenue 50. And I think we need to use our artists as problem solvers. It's true. I mean, I can remember years ago, downtown LA was pretty abandoned. Artists were coming in, they were taking over the abandoned buildings, and some of them were squatting, didn't have electricity. And they would still get together and grow that community. They would call everybody together, have an opening, sell artwork, and it eventually, I'm thinking mostly, of course, about the Chicano art community, and that helped to grow Chicano art. They were problem solvers. They couldn't get into galleries. They can't get into museums. So we have to do something that's fun and cutting edge and try to sell our work, try to support ourselves. And so I think I've taken a page from them. from the artists, and I invite them to come in and talk to me and tell me what they'd like to see. Because I feel a little bit like what you said, a matchmaker. I feel like I'm sometimes a magician. You want this to happen? Okay, let me think about it. And we'll solve that problem and try to help make it a reality out of it. So I think you have to communicate with your community. You have to listen to what their concerns are. And that's building your base. And then when you have a strong base, then you can go to the council people, to the supervisors, and say, our community is strong. This is what our community wants, and you've got that in place. You've got, they start paying attention to you. Two things: for money or for community. They'll pay attention to you. And so I think we don't have money. So what do we have? We have community. And that's our money. That's our value, is the community.
It's your currency, so to speak. So I have a question for you, Rhonda. Specifically, you brought up that spectrum of professional to amateur and the tension sometimes inherent in that. And I think it's interesting because, John, you brought up the idea of additional stakeholders and stronger stakeholders, and Catherine talked about wanting, in some ways, also stakeholders in governmental entities. And Kathleen, you're talking about really that elastic amateur to professional spectrum as well. How do you manage that? How do you go about building your credibility in both a context that maybe holds up a very professionalized, polished reality or product in a way, and at the same time build up credibility with constituencies that see or look for other kinds of value? How do you do that? Anything, you can answer anything.
Yes. So I heard matchmaker, magician, I'm the peacemaker. And Danielle had sent some emails earlier, and at one point, I think it was supposed to say creative placemaking, but it said creative peacemaking, and I said, that's me. So I find myself doing that a lot. I have a great deal of respect for a variety of arts practices. I came from a family that had no money, lots of money, then no money. I didn't go to a museum until I was in college. My sense of art was decoupage early on. So I have a place in my heart for a range, we'll leave it at that. And so I think it's important, because we have such a variety of arts organizations, in particular where we are, I'd like to see some, going back to the idea of professionalism, clarification about mission, if you will. So those groups being able to articulate for themselves who they are and what they do, and standing clear in that, and having individual places. And I think that as a whole, we need to stop making ourselves small. So while it's important, especially where we live, that we're careful about growth, we want to protect and preserve our place. You talked a little bit about that in your presentation, about how we connect or relate to a place. And so we're preserving where we live in our landscape, but thinking much larger, and thinking much larger in terms of branching out to, now I'm going off on a different topic, maybe I should stop. We don't have much city or any, do we have any city work? Pardon me? A couple of streets, okay. So we have essentially, there's two primary cities. We have Yucca Valley and we have 29 Palms, and Joshua Tree is sandwiched, but Joshua Tree is not a city, so it's governed by the county. We're like the redheaded stepchild of San Bernardino County. And so, well, we are. But we need to get out of that. So we need to be working, stop thinking small, work together collectively, be really open to the fact that, for example, right now, we have people in place in Yucca Valley and 29 Palms, city people, who are interested in the arts. And mind you, they're interested in it because they've read all of the studies about how cultural economic development is important to the growth of a place, and I think that's pertinent. But we need to sort of jump on board with that. At the same time that we don't have city financial support, but we have a little bit of support in speaking. We are really fortunate that, for example, Joshua Tree National Park, our superintendent, is very supportive of the arts. So I think we need to work together, bond together with the private, public, nonprofit, other assets that are not necessarily arts assets.
What about others? As you think about building stakeholders and the diversity of the kind of art that attracts stakeholders, how do you deal with that?
At a recent board meeting, one of the board members said, well, we're starting to do some great public art, and we've created some nice request for proposal formats, and it looks really good. And that's sort of the high quality end and very controlled, structured, so that we're kind of guaranteed as you go through the process, and it's part of my job, I take great pride in it, you come up with what ends up being good art because you've created a process that supports it. But the point was well made too, that we don't always know what the results are going to be like, and it'd be a boring world, and we're in the wrong field if we want guarantees of success. So part of it has to do with encouraging the taking creative risks. And for example, if we have a well-structured RFP process for creating public art, do we have something as we create public art policy that allows for small, we were talking about mini grants, like $500 just to go out and take the money and run. And just tell us what you're doing with it. It's okay to fail. It's okay to do something on a small scale because, hey, it might be spontaneous, it may be really rich, and people may really love it. Now, what kind of risk is that? So, part of it is, again, creating those kinds of situations that allow for a range of quality to be interpreted in different ways. I'd be the first to say that $500 mini grant, in my mind, can create something just as magical and wonderful as that highly structured $50,000 RFP project. And another thing is when you open it up to other organizations and groups that are of the community that are not cultural organizations, they're not professionals. I know some of you in the audience worked with us on a project that involved an artist working with the community, the Latino community that surrounds Our Lady of Guadalupe Church, and we worked with the church. And the most beautiful thing about the church is it's serving a poor neighborhood, but the best thing about it is their doors are always open. Anytime you go by that church, the doors are open. There's always some kind of social activity going on. If you want to find out what the heart of the neighborhood is, that's the place to go. That's the place to work through. And talk about rich cultural expressions. And in the arts field, we're so used to thinking about underserved, culturally underserved. Well, when I parsed that down, and I'm so used to that term, I started reversing it out and thinking, wait a minute, we've got it so backwards. We're thinking that they're culturally underserved, and yeah, there's some real truth to that because we are guilty as cultural institutions sometimes of underserving different populations. But truth be told, they're the richer culture. We need to tag on to their culture and figure out how to plug into it, because when I go by that church every day and I see those doors wide open, that's where the culture is happening. So part of quality is finding out where those areas of activity and love and relationship are happening, and it's not always us.
Catherine, can you say something about, not Catherine, I meant Kathleen, sorry. Can you say something about Highland Park and that spectrum? Because I know the studio deals very much with that spectrum. So over the years, what have you learned in dealing in that diversity?
Yeah, what I've learned, that's interesting. I came in, when I first opened, my snobbishness was pretty high. And then I started talking to the community and realizing that there are all levels of art that are valuable. And who decides what is good art and what's not? To me, it's that all art speaks to different people. You have very, very strict, maybe strict is not the word, but traditional Chicano art. And that community loves that kind of art. So who am I to say that's amateur? You know, it speaks to that community. A lot of conceptual art is over my head. But I understand it serves a purpose with a certain group of people. And I think more academicians than anyone else. But it's important. And so, so how we've changed is that I was pretty strict in the beginning about what could come into the gallery. And now it's more of, is there heart? Is there heart in this work? Does somebody have something that is important for them to say, and it comes through the work, and I could sense it. Day before yesterday, I had a gangster come in. He's a nice gangster, and he showed me he showed me his work, and you know, and it was almost like traditional tattoos, gangster tattoos. And I looked at it and I said, wow, that's a whole other area there, you know, of art. I wouldn't buy it and put it up on my wall, but that's a whole other area. And if I put this gentleman's work in one of the gallery spaces, it would bring in that community, because that work speaks to that community. And if we want to bring people in, we have to speak to that community. So we're going through gentrification. Do I become more Latino in my programming? I don't think so. I think we have to open it up and speak to the change that's going on in my neighborhood, but never forget my community. And because I think diversity is key, is very key to our lives. It's rich. It adds different seasonings to the pot, you know. And we need all of those voices, because, and we need to speak to all of those voices, and then you'll start broadening your community. You start broadening the community. I am one area that we're not that good at. One community is to the Asian community. But I think diversity is very key to growing an arts community, so amateur to professional. I don't know what that means really. I think all art speaks to different groups of people, and it's all valuable.
Yeah, I want to clarify something I said before. I didn't mean to sabotage the city of Pomona. Actually, we did get a nice grant for a very large mural from the city of Pomona. It was from the Arts Fund. But they are struggling bureaucracy is struggling to reconcile how do they deal with this whole art thing versus just putting up a target, which they just did a mile and a half away. And they're having trouble compiling those elements, which is what we said, the new versus the old. And secondly, the snobbishness versus cultural diversity versus amateur that confronts probably every gallery that has ever existed. We've lost several galleries, and they were actually spaces where they hoped to sell art. I mean, they were wanting to sell the art, and it was very good art, and they brought in some extremely good artists, but they couldn't make it financially. They just didn't have, we're not West Side, we're Pomona, and reality is, if you have that kind of a gallery on the West Side, you might have made it, but we don't have enough, our immediate area doesn't have enough disposable income to support that gallery, or in that particular case, and we couldn't figure out how to get people to the area to be able to support that. So part of it is your customer draw or your clientele draw, and how do you get that, and how do you know, you're right, you need diverse displays and diverse shows, bring in different populations, but you also are hoping that these artists can earn something to be able to survive, so you also have to bring in the people that can buy the material that they're trying to sell. So it's a very difficult line to straddle. And some of your funding mechanisms will make demands on you that will either support the cultural diversity side of it, or they want some really spectacular shows that are going to bring in a lot of different clientele.
So each of you talked about your vision in a way, as you could muster it in a quick moment. 10 years from now, what do you see as progress? What would be evidence of progress?
More galleries, I mean, more cultural gathering places, more outdoor patios where they can have shows and activities, and that demands a good cultural base from their community to be able to have short-term uses where people come in from 0 to 10 miles away maybe, and that's all local attraction that is mixed in together.
A question for I think all of you, but the idea of galleries, which are challenging in some of the places where you work, do you think that in addition to galleries, there are other kinds of vehicles to help create artful places? So if it wasn't just galleries, what else would you?
Well, I don't know if I'm answering it, but we believe that a certain type of person will come into the gallery. 1/10% from the building next door is going to come into my gallery. So what we decided to do is take the art out of the space and bring it into the community. And what we did is that with one of our programs called Poesía para la Gente, it's poetry for the people. And we invited poets to take poetry into unusual venues. So we took poetry into a laundromat, the one that's right down the street from us, and we called it Dirty Laundry, and and we invited poets to come out. And what was so beautiful is when I was sitting there watching the poet, behind him was the washing machine, or the clothes were going round and round while he was, talking about his sad love poem and a broken relationship. And I could also see the reflection of the people doing the laundry behind us. That was beautiful to me. And they were listening while we were, doing our poetry, speaking basically to us, but we wanted to bring that to to the community. We've taken it to the Home Depot where the day laborers hang out, waiting for work. We found out that many of these day laborers are poets themselves, and Latin America is very poetry driven. And so a couple of the day laborers got up there and told us their stories.
So given that, what's evidence of progress for you?
Yeah, I would like to see more artfulness in our community, to bring art out into the community, to engage those people that walk by with their kids and the strollers and get them involved into the arts, because you talked about health. These kids in my community, many of them, they have only, they don't have very many choices. And they need a way to deal with some of the anger that they have living in poverty, and many of them in broken homes. Anyway, our teenagers are all full of angst, right? They're always, something's bothering them. They need a way to express themselves, and a healthy way to express themselves. We want to take it away from fighting. That's, anger. And the only way they know how to do it is take it out on somebody else. Hurtful, because I'm hurting. So I think what I would like to see the arts be a leader in, artists be a leader in, is how do we help these communities using art to help heal broken souls, speak to our spirit, and heal, emotional problems. Use the arts as therapy, because basically, I know that when I first started, and I threw all my angst there, that was, and it was healing. It was like, excuse me, but it was like throwing up, just get it out of my system, right? I think I would like us to use arts, to help heal our communities, besides making it beautiful, because when you make your neighborhood beautiful, one more example. When I first moved into this building 15 years ago, the city used to have the graffiti removal people come out and, spray paint beige on the huge side of the wall, because it was always getting tagged. Sometimes it was really beautiful too. I took a picture of them a couple of times. It was really beautiful. I had layers of paint on that wall. We decided that we were going to use landscaping and paint another color. And that's what we did. We painted it a deep, beautiful blue. Nice blue I see up here. A beautiful blue across the whole wall. And it was amazing how the graffiti went down by, I would say, 95%. And then we put plants next to it. We beautified. All it took was a little beautification. And it was respected. These kids coming in and out of jail, they know institutional gray. They know institutional beige, and it's saying to them, tag here. So I said, no. So we beautified, and now it's a source of pride in our community. And that's what we have to.
What about others? What's the evidence of progress?
Oh, I think I have to agree with her that we have multiple murals in and about our downtown, and they are rarely tagged. I think another thing that bothers me a little bit about this whole idea of outside art is this extreme concern that everyone has, it's going to get damaged, it's going to get, have a problem. So you go through this ordinance, you were talking about the art ordinance and all of that, to put a mural up or put a piece of work up. And it's really complicated. It took us 9 months to get approval on something. It just was incredible about the paint you have to use and this and that. What we started with 20 years ago when we first came was we just put out the word to artists, do something. We don't care where it is, just let us know ahead of time what it's going to be. And what we came up with is a lot of 4x8 sheets of plywood that we bought the plywood, and various artists in the area created a piece of art on the plywood. We sealed it and hung it up on the buildings with wood frame. So the whole thing probably cost us $100 or something. And those murals lasted almost 20 years. And as we began to take them down because the buildings were renovated or had to be resurfaced or fixed, we put some up in the alleys. So now people walk into the alleys to look at these pieces of art. And they're fine, they're good. One of these days they'll probably come down. But what an inexpensive way, non-regulated art. And it really works. I don't know how we can
to
fit
its longevity too.
Yeah, I just hope that we could keep that in the picture somehow. I mean, we get all tied up with this ordinance and this and the beautiful murals and the expensive mural artists that come out to do their work. But what we really need too is an element of spontaneity with our public art.
Progress, success, is that the question? Okay, sorry.
For you, what's evidence of progress?
We, as a community up there, Joshua Tree Gateway Communities, that arts area, we're very successful at taking art outside. We have some galleries, we have high desert test sites, experimentations outside. There are lots of festivals. I think that for me personally and professionally, what would signal progress are a couple of things, and one of those things would be, are we sharing that with outsiders? Because we tend to get wrapped up in our own activities and they become insular and isolated, but how many of those individuals outside of where we live, even within our community, bringing people in? We have our groups, but really getting the word out, marketing, and bringing people in from say down the hill or LA or San Diego. And it's not so much about getting notoriety, but for me, sharing the art with others is important. I also think you talked a little bit about cross-sector partnerships, that for me, having hard evidence of that support would mark progress. So, as an example, the 29 Palms Art Gallery has not in its history had grants larger than $500. This year, we received one of the largest grants from the California Arts Council for the California Creative Communities. And the impetus for it was in January, the National Endowment for the Arts had announced a partnership with the National Park Service for a special grant called Imagine Your Parks, which is part of Artworks. The grant was announced in January. It was due in February. It was, in my experience, a ridiculous short amount of time for turnaround. But it was an opportunity to respond. And under ordinary circumstances, you would develop a project far in advance and then apply for a grant. Taking if you want to use the mapping cultural assets mark, looking at what existed in our community, the idea with the Imagine Your Parks grant is that there are arts activities in communities that could draw awareness about the parks and landscape. And so we developed a project which is called Sand to Stone, Contemporary Native American Art in Joshua Tree, and it has to do with the Native American tribes that have a cultural relationship with the park. And in doing so, we have partnered with the Marine Corps Base, Copper Mountain College, the National Park, Morongo Unified School District, and a number of businesses and tribes. And so for me, that is a mark of progress, is really bringing as many of those groups that are related as, you just want to bring willy-nilly everyone in, but bringing as many groups in as possible and having them really truly be an honest participant in that process is crucial. And I think that for me is not only the financial aspect of that. I mean, The annual operating budget of the 29 Palms Art Gallery is under $50,000. To be given a grant, $60,000, which is more than that, is significant. That also for me is a mark of progress, because that signals to larger state and federal agencies that we have something going on and would like you to take notice.
John? And then there's one quick question, and then we're going to open it up.
Okay. I guess I'd like to have people who live in Ontario and people who visit Ontario kind of have that inner smile and be able to say, you know, I belong here, I like being here because there's something that touches me artistically or culturally that makes this place feel right. That would be a great sign of progress for me.
Excellent. So one last question before we open it up to the audience. If you think about your successor, whoever that is, if you think about your successor, whoever that is, what advice would you give them? In just one sentence, so it's just the most important thing.
Not to lose sight of the goal of arts integration into the community, regardless of the financial demands upon you as operating as a business.
It's like your children, be courageous, be bold, and be patient as Joe.
I would say always listen to your community.
Oh boy. I guess I would say be an entrepreneur. Use what you have and truly think of new ways to step outside for funding and internal marketing.
Good. So let's open it up. Questions or comments? Anything that got your attention? Is there anyone running with mics?
I can talk loud. Let's see. Given what you all do, it's perfectly natural. We heard a whole lot about the visual arts, but aside from the poetry, there wasn't anything else. And I was wondering if any of you had engaged or provided a space for music or film or theater to help in your process.
My assistant is very much into music, and so we're now going to be having these Sunday afternoon sessions. So we are going more into the music end of it also. I've tried to bring in theater. I did. We just got a new space, the third and final space available in our building, and to me it was a perfect place for a theater. And I approached a couple of organizations in Highland Park, but we were never able to get that off the ground, because I think that's another component I'd like to bring to our community.
I mentioned that we just had the Joshua Tree International Film Festival, which sounds really big, and it can be. It's not quite there yet, but it is there. And then we have the Joshua Tree Music Festival, which is in its probably 15th year. There are a number of theaters up and down our corridor, one of which I believe is called the Groves, and I think it seats about 15 people, but apparently it is phenomenal, and I haven't been there yet. There are a variety of other arts opportunities there, but that's the other thing, is like I hear these things here and there, but I haven't experienced them all because I'm usually too late to the party.
Yes.
You scare me. Because I've been in many of I'm trained in the visual arts. I was a graduate of Immaculate Heart College when it still existed. So Corita Kent was one of the people that framed and formed the way we look at things. Because I'm very interested in the connections among things. I'm wondering if you are also involved in any way, I haven't heard it yet, but that doesn't mean the question wasn't asked. Are you utilizing the dance, the movement people, the cultural literature from which many of the ideas come, from which that construction. However, that is the question. Do you have interrelated things going on in your community that would pull in other people than the arts forms which have already been spoken about?
We do to some extent in Cremona because we have the Fox Theater, which, you know, granted it's not all big bands or whatever there, but they do have opportunities for groups to perform there. The Glass House is the same. Dog Gallery has performances, poetry readings, plays, little mini operas, whatever. But we also have Second Saturday Art Walk, so we have a lot of allowances. The city allows a lot of outdoor activity and bands or performing artists to roam around. And the school's one of their main campuses buildings is downtown. So they have a black box theater there that seats 99. And that's very active as well.
This has been a very interesting session. I have two questions. One is the difficulty for people in a community to find out what's happening culturally in their own community. So I'm wondering if you all have been able to create like a community cultural online calendar so that people in the community can find out what's happening in their community culturally. And number two, has there been a way for artists to start to solve social problems, being asked to solve those problems in your community? For instance, in Santa Monica, an artist saw there were a lot of homeless people and set up a place for them to take showers and have lockers and get telephone calls, and then parlayed into a huge project that the Annenberg ultimately funded for homeless people in Santa Monica. And I think that artists being asked to participate in problem solving in a community would be a really great thing.
We started with our Arts and Culture Strategic Planning Group to, one of the early results was creating a joint website where people could access what's going on with different organizations as well as calendar-wise. And so that's ontarioartsandculture.org. It's still formative. It takes a lot of resources to keep something like that up, but I think at least the effort is being made in our community. The second one is a lot tougher to my mind, which is there are too few pathways for communication between artists and problems or challenges out there in the community. And very often what happens is something spontaneous, kind of on the fringe. But by pathways, I mean as part of a recognized process that can include artists. I think it's all too rare. And I think part of this discussion is about that need.
As far as getting the word out of a cultural calendar, we have a lot of neighborhood councils, and I don't know if they have neighborhood councils out here or in Claremont. But we also have a thing called Nila Arts, and it's a newspaper. It maps all of the galleries that are in our art walk. About using artists as problem solvers, Highland Park seems to have a wonderful history of that. First, that I know of, that off the top of my head, is with the Arroyo Arts Collective. It's a collective of artists in Highland Park. They didn't have a physical space, so they had to do something to get to get themselves noticed, and they would apply for grants and to do public art. So they would beautify the trash cans in the neighborhood. Also, what's happening right now in Highland Park, because of gentrification. The artists pretty much are in the lead fighting that. And it's called, the group there is called Neela Alliance. And they also do tenant rights workshops at the Avenue 50 studio. We've had a couple of them there. They've led parades, a couple of them now, to fight, anti-gentrification parades, to talk about what's going on with the low income being pushed out of the neighborhood. So the biggest problem in Highland Park right now is gentrification, and they're focused on that.
I have two very quick responses to the latter question. Otis College of Art and Design in LA recently put in for an NEA grant working with Joshua Tree National Park to actually have what would be the extent of an art ranger, and that would be someone in the creative field that goes into the park and sits on their ranger team to solve problems like graffiti in the park, which I think is really interesting, and I'll leave it at that. But I think that shows the innovation and the leadership within our park and opportunities that we have. To the first question, it's very problematic where we live. We had the Morongo Basin Cultural Arts Council where we used to be able to go and find a lot of the arts information. We have 3 different chambers, Yucca, Joshua Tree, and 29 Palms, but there isn't a and there's a few independent places or individuals, organizations that are trying to pull these things together. It requires a lot more work than I think we realize. There are 2 movements afoot, and one is the Joshua Tree National Park Council for the Arts is sort of making a guard change, and so something might happen there. And the other is that we have an active group, which is called the Joshua Tree Gateway Communities Group, which is part of Desert Regional Tourism Agency. Thank you. And they're working to create a portal that would have a portion of that there.
And the Arts Council has a web page that we'd like to encourage you to upload your information and events to.
Question back here.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Right here.
I'm sorry, this is my first time with microphone. I'm a little nervous. But my name is David Williams, and I'm representing the Creative Dollar Arts Gallery with the Inland Empire Art Institute. And this is my posse right here. And I have 2 questions, actually. One, I heard the word gallery being thrown around a lot while you guys are up there. And directly, I forgot, is it Caitlin or, I forgot, the promoter? Or Kathy, I'm sorry about that. And I want to know what was the biggest issue with getting those spaces for the galleries? Is it the fact that the landlords want to get paid for use, or was it finding people to actually come in and have galleries in there?
I think the primary problem is we had it easy because we made the commitment early on that basements could be art galleries, which shocked everybody because sometimes the ceilings are only 8 foot high.
Right.
But we have some beautiful art galleries in the basements. And the second was to commit some first floor space as well. And I think what the problem is in an area like Pomona, you have parcels, land parcels throughout the downtown. Some are only 20 foot wide, but you might have a block that's owned by 7 different people. And the problem there is, that one person relies on his income from that building and can't afford to give up the space. So now we're trying to convince new developers coming in that they need to give up space for free galleries, for community center galleries, whatever you want to call them, but they need to give up some free space.
Right.
It's a hard sell. And we really just took who we could. We actually talked the dog gallery into moving from a really weird second floor. You had to cross a roof to get to it. We talked them into taking a first floor space when we first opened in 96 or somewhere in there. And then a few others came into basements. And so it's kind of been an evolving process. But it's really critical to convince building owners they really, in the interest of keeping their buildings full, in the interest of having a really nice neighborhood that's going to be active, they need to get into the arts. It's a hard sell.
Right. Because the reason why I asked that was because my club, we're trying to extend outside of the school because we're an environmental design type of thing, and we want to create galleries, within the Inland Empire, and trying.
You talk to anybody that's interested.
Okay, awesome. And my second question was, I'm sorry. My second question was because we were talking about graffiti art and putting up murals and having issues. You said it's a low issue, but with graffiti walls murals being graffiti, on the walls, would it be, I guess, possible if you talk to the city to have legal graffiti walls out there? Because I know cities like Venice, they have the graffiti walls out there where you could just go up and tag the walls, and it's a fun event. It's like people go out to Venice to see those things, so it could bring in more artists from outside of our communities come in and view the art and possibly put up their own art. Like I know there's a spot in New York where it's 5 Points got recently demolished, and that really struck chords with the art community. So I know street artists out there are interested in doing things like that. So I wanted to see if that was something that would be possible to implement in our communities or so.
Great idea.
I think that's a good idea.
Great idea.
Yeah,
I'm
that's
totally
a great
stealing
idea.
that. Okay. Where do you want to go next?
3 hands, 1, 2,
Right here?
and then 4 in the back, and then unfortunately.
Yeah, I think artists can make a really good contribution of being problem solvers. I actually use art making as city making, and I've kind of developed this national reputation amongst urban planners from New York to San Francisco, all over the country, on just applying simple art making techniques to imagine, investigate, construct, and reflect to the planning process. And it's really kind of revolutionizing the way people plan cities now. How New York City plans transportation, or how Oregon plans their parks. They're using this method now. So I think artists will play a really important part of the overall community fabric and kind of get people engaged. And also as a way to really change the way the structures of the way bureaucracy works in cities.
Thank you. So there's a second hand.
Where was I going? Where was I going? Oh, down
Right
here.
here. In the middle, 2 down, right. And then 3, and then you'll have the last word in the back.
Hello, my name is Leslie Bryant. I teach at Cal State San Bernardino, and I work a lot with children. So I'm really interested in, any of you can reply, what kind of work you do with very young children. I'm thinking more like elementary school, that helps them find artists within themselves.
We have a program at the 29 Palms Art Gallery. We have a chair who is our education chair, who used to be an elementary school art teacher. And so we host programs monthly for kids. What's happened recently, specifically in 29 Palms, is that the art teachers have been removed, specifically from the high school. And so there are very little opportunities. So there are a number of individuals within the community who have stepped up, again, very quickly to create programs where they're actually going into schools and working with the teachers. And they're one-offs right now. But as they are happening, the schools and the district is taking more notice. And my hope is that we'll be able to find grants to help bring kind of privatized art back into the schools.
When we first started, there was more money for field trips. And so we had a couple of teachers who were into the arts bring their little kids, and they all sat on the floor. And we talked about the art. I thought that was beautiful. And I've been talking to the different schools, but I can't seem to get the teachers to come out and do a field trip at a gallery and sit and just talk about what those kids see. I think we've got to, there is a grant, and I'm not sure what grant it is, that they're giving schools money for field trips again. So we need to put money into that.
We have a docent program and traditionally have brought students in, including at a very young age, and museums are great at doing that. It is a challenge with reduced funding for field trips, plus teachers are just overwhelmed and super busy. So part of what we're trying to do is revitalize our concept of what does the curator of education do, and how do we go into the schools, how do we support that? And most importantly, you know, when you're talking about young children, you're talking about families, and you're talking about an incredible universe of relationships that come with the children. So we're trying to look at it a lot more holistically and in terms of special projects where children are involved in exploring their communities and creating some kind of product that the families can then invest in and have a relationship with the cultural institution.
And I have to agree, two of our galleries are very involved in community education programs for the younger children. Transportation is an issue, no question about it. The schools are not active in the arts very nominally. There is a field trip, I think, once a year for the junior and senior high school students. They come down and they go through various galleries and look at murals and things of that nature. So I think it's an area that we're really overlooking, but I'm not really sure how to solve it.
I forgot to say one thing. The Contemporary Native American Art Project that we're doing is multidisciplinary, so it's exhibition, performance, etc. So one of the components of the grant was to put money into the grant to bus, I think it's 11 classes to Copper Mountain College for bird singers, sort of intertribal powwow, if you will. The challenge, of course, is that amounts to about $5,000, which is not insignificant. So when you talk about field trips, it's a big chunk of change.
As I mentioned, Claremont is starting a new public arts commission, and in fact, we're starting our first meeting on Monday, and we're going to be meeting once a month on Monday in the city council chambers. And when you mentioned, Catherine, about the call to artists, and that you now have several, one thing I need to try and grow is a call to artists. How do we let people know that we're looking for public art, or that we have applications available, and you know, what's the best way to start growing that for us?
Well, I think one of the, well, it's not really a problem. One of the things we need to work on is communication more between art organizations themselves. Because, I mean, aside from the fact that I know artists who moved to your area, I would have no idea that it was extensive as it was, or it is. And this is true with, you know, we all know where the Brewery Art Walk is in LA, but that's because all of us have been around a long time. But as we older ones go away, how do we get these groups and organizations to communicate? There are probably systemic things available at this point, but I think we need to go on that. As far as your specific question, if you call the Downtown Owners Association, they can put a call out on their website.
Thank you. And we'll go to the last question. Hi, I'm Barbara Babcock. I'm proud to be a member of the Fine Arts Commission of San Bernardino, and I'd like to invite everyone to go onto Facebook and to like San Bernardino Fine Arts Commission. I have a question for you. What have you done that has been maybe out of the box to get the city to work with you? Let me give you one idea of something that what happened to us many years ago in San Bernardino. You may have heard we're bankrupt. Has anybody heard that? That we're really messed up. You know what? The arts are going to make a difference in San Bernardino. Several years ago, our mayor, Judith Valles, who's now the president of the symphony, imposed a tax or a fee on every developer. 1/2 of 1% went to fine arts. Well, we didn't do anything for several years, but Dottie Garcia, would you stand up, Dottie? She's our chair. And Michael Segura, stand up. He is our resident mural guru, young person. We actually have really gotten involved after not doing anything for 3 years. And one of the things that we did is it was a small amount, but we gave $5,000 to each of the 7 council members to have them come up with some idea of what's going on and do something in their ward. Sad to say, most of them don't have a clue. But they're learning because we're working with them, we're educating them, and we're shaming them into making a difference with the arts in San Bernardino. And I really recommend that you get your newspapers. We've got several newspapers here from San Bernardino today involved. We can make a difference, but you've got to be vocal. Squeaky wheel gets the grease. So I'd love to know something else that you guys have done to not say shame, but to encourage your elected public servants to do something positive for the arts. Thank you for being here. I've learned a lot.
That's a great question, and if we could just take it in a really brief response, just one sentence of what you've done that you think is outside the box that has encouraged the kind of support.
Okay, individual invitations to events. Personally pick them up and take them down. And if you're relying on them to come on their own, they won't come. And the minute you get them involved and get them seeing what's going on, they are much more likely to look at ordinances and events and money give outs and all the other stuff. They're going to remember what they saw. I don't really know how else to do it. It takes a lot of dinners, wine, and events to do it.
Thank you. One sentence.
Well, I'm a city employee. But, you know, on the other side of it, one can be amazed if you set the table right. I'm amazed by the enthusiasm and leadership of representatives and our electeds in our city. But I don't take it for granted because I've been in so many communities where that has not been the case. I don't think there's a magic formula, but unless people in the community really advocate for it, it's just happenstance.
So advocacy is your, yeah.
Well, I've been really bad on that point and have not really involved any city or county or state. But I believe in advocacy. I believe we do have to, you know, I'm starting to learn that that's what we have to do. And so.
Thank you.
What was the question?
The question was, what have you done that's out of the box to enlist the support of city partners? Is that right?
Force them? Really, I don't know that it's so out of the box, but I don't like focusing on encouraging people to support the arts purely out of the economic development idea, but that is what it has come down to this last year. And so we do have city support by nature of showing them examples of other areas that have done festivals and art events that bring money, and it has to do with cultural tourism and encouraging them to see that light, and then they get on board when they start seeing dollar signs. And again, that's not the most important thing, but if that's one of the ways that I can get them to be involved, then I will do it.
So just a quick response from the moderator. One thing I've seen around the country, which I think is really interesting, and it's not prevalent everywhere, but there is momentum gaining around this, and someone mentioned it in the audience, is the framing of artists and the arts sector as a resource as opposed to a supplicant. So to stand firm in the posture of being someone that is contributing or being an entity that contributes as opposed to being in the supplicant position is a really strong term. I think a lot of times the expectation is that the arts sector is going to ask for money. And it's a surprise when that's not the case, when the arts sector shows up as a resource. And it can happen in small ways that make a big, big difference. So in some ways it is reframing the idea of currency. I mean, the currency is creativity. The currency is the ability to think outside of the box and bring fresh ideas and a different point of view. So my answer to you would be reframing currency. And we are, I think, at lunchtime, right?
That's right. I want to thank all of our panelists for such wonderful insight and for that segue into the next panel after lunch, when we will be talking with some artists who have been working in the community that will continue the conversation. Our break is until 12:45. Whoa, sorry, 1:45. 1:45, and at 1:45 we'll be back here for that panel. Let's give them a round of applause, please. Thank you.